morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I know you're probably anxious for our return to our reading and discussion of this marvelous book, another marvelous book by R.W. Thompson, entitled The Footprints of the Jesuits. And so we'll do that. We concluded at the top of page 22 in the book, if you're following along, yesterday. And we'll resume there just by backing up a moment and refreshing our memory where we were. We're talking about the time in the 6th century when the Bishop of Rome, then just a common bishop, a bishop among bishops, a bishop of Rome, just as there was a bishop in other parts of the country. He was equal to all the other bishops. As a matter of fact, prior to this declaration of the Bishop of Rome being the Pope, if there was any preeminence at all among the bishops of the true Christian church, that preeminence would obviously have been in Jerusalem. But the Bible makes no mention of it. Oh, by the way, the Bible makes no mention that God would appoint a human being, another human being, bishop or no, that would be the vicar or the replacement of Christ upon the earth. So we have to understand that the papacy is a human invention, not foretold in the Scripture, not predicted in prophecy, not even mentioned, okay, as such as we know it today. So, prior to the 6th century, the Bishop of Rome was just a bishop among bishops, but here in the 6th century, the Pope or the Bishop of Rome became the Bishop of bishops. In other words, head bishop, head over all the other bishops, or head of all the other churches. And here in a note at the bottom of the page, R.W. Thompson cites a source of a historian. The work is called Universal Church History by Alzog in Volume 1, page 674. It says, this recognized papal authority, that when the time when the Bishop of Rome was no longer a bishop among bishops, but became the Bishop of bishops, or the Pope, it says, this recognized papal authority, in order to be as nearly as exact as possible, fixes it in the year 510. So very early in the 6th century is the first the world ever heard of the Bishop of Rome being the Pope. Okay. Now the question obviously needs to be asked by God-fearing people, Bible-reading people, on this question of the role of the papacy on the earth. Why, if God was going to appoint a bishop of bishops, or a pope on the earth, or, as it is claimed by the papacy, a vicar of Christ, a replacement of Christ on the earth, why would he wait until the 6th century to do it? Very valid question, and I think most of my listeners can come forward with a very plausible answer and very similar to mine. It simply didn't happen, okay? It's a completely human invention. Now, it said, speaking of this 6th century ascendance of the papacy, it says, before that time, they, that is the bishops of Rome, had exercised at Rome only such powers as metropolitan bishops elsewhere, each of them having been called Papa or Pope. Okay, apparently was just originally just another name for bishop. Now it says, when the Roman bishop acquired by usurpation the exclusive title of the Pope, the other metropolitan bishops were reduced to a condition of inferiority and subordination, and he then required only the temporal power to assure to him the power and jurisdiction the Jesuits now claim for him. Okay, so it was up to the civil powers to maintain the authority of the Bishop of Rome. He was a beggar. He didn't have any way to usurp his power over anyone else. He had to convince the world that he had power, and then he had to compel or bribe or by any other means compel the civil powers to uphold that authority. And now that is a role that is taken by the Jesuits. It is the Jesuits who compel the kingdoms of the earth to recognize the authority of the Pope, to recognize both his spiritual authority and his temporal or kingly authority. And as just a reminder for those who don't know what the temporal power of the Pope is, it's his King of Kings status. Okay, the Bible tells us that he rules over the kings of the earth. That makes him an imperial power, a global king. Okay, that is what is asserted by the papacy, that he is the King of Kings. And that's what history records as well. He plays his role to the hilt. Now continuing, when the Roman bishop acquired by usurpation the exclusive title of the Pope, the other metropolitan bishops were reduced to a condition of inferiority and subordination, and he then required only the temporal power to assure to him the power and jurisdiction the Jesuits now claim for him. It took several hundred years of conflict within the churches and with the civil powers to accomplish this, and was only accomplished at last by subduing impotent kings and so uniting the power of the church with that of the state. Talking about a union of church and states, one of the first things the Antichrist church did was to unite church and state as to hold ignorant populations in subjection. So the Pope usurps, the Bishop of Rome usurps the authority of all other bishops, calls himself the Bishop of Bishops, or the Pope, compels kings to uphold his temporal power, and then unites church and state. Okay, when the civil power began upholding the power of the temporal power, or the kingly power of the popes, there became, by definition, a union of church and state. So what we're talking about is the woman and the beast upon which she rides, Revelation 17. The woman is the church, and the beast is the power that carries her. Okay? And she directs and controls the civil power. God just showed us in visible terms what we see right here in this book in historical terms. It says, and by the way, I'm hearing an echo. If there's somebody on the line, please hang up. Now it says, he used this union of church and state, first created by subduing impotent kings, in other words, kings that weren't really worthy of their position as king, dumb kings, and then used those impotent kings to unite the power of the church and the state, and then used that union of church and state to hold ignorant populations in subjection. So here we have the spirit of Nicolaitanism. This is the beast system. This is the church beast system described for us vividly in Revelation chapter 17. And the whole purpose of it was to lord it over and to bring into subjection every man, woman, and child under his authority. Nicolaitanism. This is a characteristic of the Gentile nations. Until they're regenerated in Christ, they follow the Gentile pattern of subduing and subjugating their subjects. and they use war as conquest to advance their causes. And this is the spirit of Nicolaitanism, which Christ hates. Okay? It is not to be known among God's people, this spirit of Nicolaitanism. And this is what leads God's true people to recognize the beast and the woman which controls it. Since we don't have the spirit of Nicolaitanism, we see this subjugation and this usurpation and trampling of the rights of the people as abhorrent and something contrary to the model that Christ gave us. And this is why all Bible-believing Christians should be able to recognize the diabolical nature, the Nicolaitan nature of this woman-beast union, church-state union that is centered about Rome. Now, continuing, it says, and now that the Italians, remember we're talking about a period of time when the Italians have thrown off the temporal or the kingly power of the Pope. They're sick and tired of his oppressions, sick and tired of his Nicolaitanism, and they now wish, by following the example of the United States of America, they now wish to establish their own government that is responsive to the people, not subjugating of the people, but liberating of the people. They want their own government. They want their own king that rules at their behest with limitations placed upon him, whereas the papacy would accept no limitations. The people wanted to put limitations upon their civil government. They wanted laws passed that were favorable to the people. In other words, they wanted to elevate themselves out of the oppression of papal rule to follow the example of Protestant America. Now, Italy, being a Roman Catholic country, saw the advantage, as did all the other nations of Europe, saw the advantage of throwing off the papal yoke. And everybody, including Italy, all the other nations in Europe wished to follow the Protestant example, the American example. Italy was no exception. And it says, now that the Italians, after submitting to this humiliation for more than 1,000 years, that's papal subjugation, they were submitted to this Nicolaitan spirit for more than 1,000 years, and finding all the sources of their prosperity withered up, have abolished and destroyed this illicit and usurped temporal power. Look, they recognized, Italy, the Roman Catholic country, recognized that the papacy was an illicit usurpation. Okay? Roman Catholics recognized the papacy had no real power. And it said, these Italians have abolished and destroyed this illicit and usurped temporal power and taken into their own hands the administration of their own temporal affairs, obeying the example set them by the people of the United States. The Jesuits employ all their energies to reverse this popular verdict and plunge them again into the dreary chasm from which they have escaped. So, just as soon as liberty raised its threatening head over the papacy in Italy, the Jesuits set about to plunder that liberty and to force the Italians back under papal suppression and subjugation. The first order of business for the Jesuit order is to increase the temporal or kingly power of the Pope to global proportion. Unlimited jurisdiction. Every man, woman, and child on the planet should be directly or indirectly subject of the Pope. And they won't stop in that endeavor. if they do ever falter in that endeavor, they will literally cease to be Jesuits, as G.B. Nicolini says in his work. And that's another work we'll get to eventually here on Inquisition Update. He says the Jesuits employ all their energies to reverse this popular verdict of government of, by, and for the people, throwing off the temporal yoke of the Pope and then taking under their own responsibility self-government, establishing their own republics, their own constitutions, separating the church from the state. That's in effect what they did. They threw off the temporal power of the Pope, and they took that power unto themselves. They separated the church and the state. No longer was the state going to be the respondent to the church. The state, under Victor Emmanuel, was going to be respondent to the people. Now, the Pope, according to the Italian people at this time, could remain their spiritual head, the head of the church, and could continue his job as Pope. But as King of Kings, they fired him. Okay? They fired him. They said, we'll do this ourselves. That's basically what happened. The same thing that happened in the United States, although it was never a question per se that the Pope would ever be a king in this country. It basically started with the tenet that the Pope was no God on this earth, was no king, and that the people would govern themselves. And we started from the very beginning with a republic. But the Italian people were under papal bondage, servant to this woman-beast system. And they simply wanted the woman off the beast, and they wanted their own government that was friendly to the people. All right, we beat that to death, but this is basic. This is why we go over this over all the time and relate it to the Scriptures so doubters can see that we're talking about the fulfillment of Bible prophecy here. We can't be laissez-faire or casual about this discussion. This is Bible prophecy being fulfilled. Now, the Jesuits, says R.W. Thompson, are subtle disputants. When they talk about the papacy reconciling itself to any form of government, they reserve to themselves the meaning that it does not interfere either in monarchies or republics in which local and limited affairs as pertain to the common and ordinary interests of society in the management of countries, townships, cities, and municipalities. Okay, the Jesuits argue that we don't get involved. It doesn't matter what form of government we're talking about, whether monarchies or republics, we don't get involved into the limited affairs of the ordinary interests of society in the management of counties, townships, cities, and municipalities. Okay? He says these may be conducted without complaint under one form of government as well as another, and are held to be such temporal affairs as the Pope may exclude from his spiritual jurisdiction without any violation of the divine law. But, when measures of public policy pass beyond these local and limited spheres, county, state, and city, they involve matters which the Pope shall decide and have relation to the Church, to the papacy, to faith, or to morals. His jurisdiction attaches, and according to the Jesuits, he possesses the divine right to regulate and to direct them. All right? A long way of saying, you local folks, you can pretty much do as you want, but I'm going to control the central government. I'm going to control the federal government in every country, whether it be monarchies or whether it be democracies or republics. He's going to maintain his King of Kings status. Now, it just common sense dictates that if the Pope has control of the federal government, whether it be a monarchy or a republic, that government's going to control the state, county, and local governments too. Okay? So they put up this straw man. You know, we're accused of meddling in the affairs of government, but we don't get into the affairs of the minor governmental jurisdictions of every country. That's supposed to be an excuse to disarm those who assail the Jesuits for their history. The fact of the matter is they do control the governments of the world. History as well as Scripture declares this. And it says, but when measures of public policy pass beyond these local and limited spheres and involve matters which the Pope shall decide to have relation to the Church, to the papacy, to faith, or to morals, the Pope's jurisdiction attaches, and according to the Jesuits, he possesses the divine right to regulate and to direct them. So the Pope claims, and the Jesuits enforce, the notion that the Pope has divine right, authority from God, to regulate national and international affairs. That's his realm of operations by the kings of the earth. Now it says, so that when civil institutions are constructed, no matter in what form, by which church and state are separated and the freedom of religious belief is guaranteed, as they are by the Constitution of the United States, they are brought within this unlimited jurisdiction of the Pope. And he may pass such sentence of condemnation upon them as he shall deem necessary to maintain his own infallibility as well as his spiritual and temporal power. Okay? So, we're talking about the jurisdiction of the Pope. We're talking about the federal government who by the Constitution has separated church and state, recognizing the error of a union of church and state, both from Scripture and from history, recognizing the error prophesied in the Bible called the woman who rides the beast, Revelation 17, in their Christian Protestant wisdom, they separated church and state. And the papacy will not tolerate it. To be king of kings, there must be a union of church and state. The papacy is nothing unless the civil power serves the church. The civil power is the arm of the papacy. The papacy is armless without the civil power to enforce his decrees. The Pope lives in a town, a city, the Bible calls it, that's only 108 acres. He has no militia or military force that can go traipsing around the world and bringing people to subjection to his authority. He has to rely on the civil governments of every nation to do that. And that's what he does. He demands that by divine right, he is and should be recognized as the King of Kings, and that the governments of the world must cooperate with the church, that is, the state must serve the church, and the state and the church must be united as one entity, one superior and one inferior. That is, the church is superior, the state is inferior, and the state serves the church. We'll be back right after these messages.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a Left Behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. In the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. We'll continue where we left off. R.W. Thompson says that so that when civil institutions are constructed, that is civil governments, when civil governments are constructed, no matter in what form, by which the church and the state are separated and the freedom of religious belief is guaranteed, as they are by the Constitution of the United States, they are brought within the unlimited jurisdiction of the Pope, and he may pass such sentence of condemnation upon them as he shall deem necessary to maintain his own infallibility as well as his spiritual and temporal power. So, what you conclude from this is that the papacy has always regarded the Constitution of the United States and our form of government as heretical, because we have guaranteed religious liberty in this country. Catholics can be Catholics, Protestants can be Protestants, and God gets to bless all as he chooses. And the state is separate from the church. The state can't establish a religion, can't make Protestantism the religion of the country, can't make Catholicism the religion of the country. And by the way, they are opposing churches. One is of Christ, the other is of Antichrist. Our Constitution, which guarantees religious liberty, which is forbidden in Roman Catholic canon law, and the separation of church and state, which is also forbidden in Roman Catholic canon law, makes the United States and its Constitution and its institutions heretical, according to the papacy. According to canon law, the Roman Catholic Church is the only church of Jesus Christ. All else is apostasy and heresy and is to be destroyed. And that means our government, our system, our Protestantism, our separation of church and state must be destroyed. And the papacy has made no bones about it ever in its history. The only way that the papacy can be truly the papacy is if he rules the whole world and exterminates this heresy. And that's what they've endeavored to do. The papacy, with the help of the Jesuit order, which controls the governments and overthrows them and makes them count. And because of this history of the Jesuits performing their role in the world for the benefit of the papacy, they've been kicked out of every country in the world except the United States of America. Anyway, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. He says, if in the execution of this extraordinary spiritual power, the Pope and the Jesuit general at Rome shall unite in a decree that all such institutions shall be opposed, resisted, and overthrown, the Jesuit militia are always ready to pay obedience, because it is one of the fundamental maxims of their society that when thus commanded, with reference to anything concerning the Church, the papacy, faith, or morals, that is, of the Roman Catholic Church, disobedience is visited with divine displeasure. So they hear in the voice of the Pope God Almighty. And when this God Almighty of the Roman Catholic Church, this Antichrist, this Pope, decrees a nation to be heretical, the Jesuits go into action to overthrow it. Now, this is what's happening at this period of time in Italy. So far, we're talking mostly about the United States of America. But the United States of America and Italy at this time have something great in common. They're throwing off the temporal power of the Pope. So the Jesuits are called into action. Italy is blasphemously, according to the papacy, following the example of heretical United States of America. And they dare to overthrow the temporal power of the Pope in Italy. And the Pope's just not going to have it, and neither are the Jesuits. And so the Jesuits go into action. What do? They recruit the help of Roman Catholics in America to help overthrow the Italian elected government and to put the Pope back over the people of Italy. Now, wouldn't you expect that they would demand the same thing here in America, since the people of America don't worship the Pope as a god? That's what R.W. Thompson's getting to here, and I don't want my listeners to miss this. He says, before he entered Rome with his victorious troops, and with the hope of pacifying the Pope, Victor Emmanuel, and I'll add the words, the liberator of Italy, Victor Emmanuel, well, he says, the liberator of the Italian people, addressed an affectionate letter to Pope Pius IX, calling him the chief of Catholicity, and expressing the hope and intention that nothing should be done inconsistent, quote, with the inviolability of the sovereign pontiff and of his spiritual authority, and with the independence of the Holy See, unquote. Notice he said nothing about his temporal power. Victor Emmanuel didn't address the temporal power. He was there to overthrow the Pope's temporal power, and the Pope knew it too. And it says, but this kindly spirit of Victor Emmanuel was not reciprocated by the irascible Pope, who excitedly rejected the overture of pacification. Thereupon the victorious troops entered the city of Rome and terminated the temporal dominion of the Pope, which had rested upon the Italian people with crushing weight for nearly 1,400 years. Then the Pope, having lost his royal diadem, his temporal power, nothing more, and with the view of prescribing it as an article of faith that it should be recovered again, his temporal power, caused his Cardinal Secretary of State to notify Victor Emmanuel to that effect. This is how he did it. Quote, now remember, this is the Secretary of State of the Vatican. He's speaking at the behest and representing the Pope to Victor Emmanuel, who has just fired the Pope as the King of Italy. He says, quote, I have the command of His Holiness to declare, that is the Pope, to declare, and the undersigned does hereby declare, in the august name of His Holiness, that is the Pope, that such usurpation, he's calling what Victor Emmanuel is doing as usurpation, is devoid of all effect, is null and invalid, and that it can never convey any prejudice to the indisputable and lawful rights of dominion and of possession, whether of the Holy Father himself or of his successors in perpetuity. And although the exercise of these rights may be forcibly pretended or hindered, yet His Holiness both knows his rights, intends to conserve them intact, and re-enter at the proper time into their actual possession, unquote. So the papacy is telling Victor Emmanuel in no uncertain terms, I am the king of Italy. I'm the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords all over the world, not just Italy. And you may, for a time, ride into Italy and overthrow my temporal scepter. But as a divine right ruler of this world, I will re-enter as King of Kings and Lord of Lords in Italy. I have spoken. So this is the attitude of the papacy. We may take this example of his speech or his letter to Victor Emmanuel as exactly what he would tell the usurpers, the founders of the United States of America, who never did acknowledge the papacy as a king of the government of the United States. So the American people should have been watching very carefully how this Pope Pius IX, responded to Victor Emmanuel to get a preview of exactly how this Pope related to the government of the United States. He says, I have the command of His Holiness to declare, and undersigned does hereby declare in the august name of His Holiness, that such usurpation, the papacy regards the government of the United States as a usurpation, that such usurpation is devoid of all effect, is null and invalid, and that it can never convey any prejudice to the indisputable and lawful rights of dominion and of possession, whether of the Holy Father himself or of his successors in perpetuity. And although the exercise of these rights may be forcibly prevented and hindered, yet His Holiness both knows his rights, intends to conserve them intact, and re-enter at the proper time into their actual possession. That's what he said about Italy, and that's what he said tacitly about the United States of America. And I'm here to tell the listeners of this program that the time has arrived that the papacy re-enter into the actual possession of his rights and his jurisdiction in this country. Not just Italy, not just Europe, not just Asia, not just Eurasia, not just Australia and South America and Central America and Mexico, not just Canada, but the United States as well. That's what the New World Order is. Now, R.W. Thompson continues. He says, these are expressive words, and every Jesuit interprets them to mean that having the direct approval of an infallible Pope, they impose the religious obligation of obedience upon all the members of their society, and that it will be offensive to God if they shall cease their struggle for the restoration of the temporal power of the Pope before it is accomplished. Okay? This is when the Jesuits are called into action. Anytime, anywhere in the world where the temporal power of the Pope is threatened, the Jesuits automatically go into full action to restore the kingly status of the Pope over any rebellious government, whether it be a monarchical government, whether it be a fascist government, whether it be a communist government, whether it be a democratic government or a republic. No matter what form of government we're talking about, the Pope may just allow the counties, the states, and the municipalities alone, but he's going to control the central government of every country. And if he's not in control, it's the destiny of the Jesuits to restore that control. That's the purpose they serve in the world, or they cease to be Jesuits. Now he says, therefore they so enlarge the spiritual jurisdiction and authority of the Pope as to make the question of the restoration of his temporal power an international one, so that he shall have the divine right to require all professing Christians to obey him in all matters relating to that question, no matter under what government or in what part of the world they may live. Now, folks, you can't describe that as anything but the potential of the Pope to raise a global protest against Italy and Victor Emmanuel. That's exactly what they did. And they're about to raise that same global protest against the United States of America. By some estimation, that's already happened. As a matter of fact, it didn't even take any protest because the ecumenical movement just handed this country over lock, stock, and barrel to the Pope. Okay? The ecumenical movement accomplished, without even firing a shot, what all the revolutionary governments throughout the world had to accomplish by force of arms. To throw off the Jesuit yoke, to throw off the papal yoke. The United States went down without a fight. The Protestants turned ecumenical evangeli-belly. They forgot who the Antichrist was, and they simply started to begin to acknowledge the Pope as the leader of the Christian religion. And that the Protestant Reformation must have been a grievous error. As much as we admire Martin Luther and all the other Protestant reformers, they must have been in grave error because they thought the Pope was the Antichrist. Well, we now believe in all the ecumenical evangeli-belly churches that Antichrist doesn't show up in the world until we're raptured out of here. Gone. In a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, see? And so the Antichrist is just one man, and he doesn't show up till the end of time, and besides that, we're all going to be gone. So the Pope must be a holy man, right? The Protestant reformers were wrong. As a matter of fact, the Protestant reformers must have been steered by Satan himself to rebel against the one true, holy, Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. And so, as a matter of repentance, we must reunite with the Roman Catholic Church. You see the damage that futurism did to the Protestant Reformation? As we covered in previous broadcasts, and when we read and discussed this little booklet that I'm holding in my hand, The Origin of Dispensational Futurism and its entry into Protestant Christianity, we proved that futurism, the whole idea that Antichrist is a single person held off for 2,000 years until the end of time, was a creation of the Jesuit order. And that was to defeat the Protestant Reformation. It was the most shrewd attack against the Protestant Church and the Protestant Reformation since the beginning. It blinded the Protestant faith. It can hardly any longer call itself Protestant because it has forgotten who the Antichrist is, and it no longer protests Antichrist. There was a spirit of Protestantism in this country when this government was founded. It never recognized the papacy as anything but the head of the Roman Catholic Church. That's it, at best. Now they want the Pope involved and Roman Catholics and the Roman Catholic Church involved in our government. And they've got the voluntary help of the ecumenical evangeli-belly churches. Virtually all of Christianity in this country is now on the same side with the government. So guess where that leaves God's true people? People like R.W. Thompson, people like myself and others who are speaking out against the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. Guess where that leaves us? The only heretics left in the country. An extreme minority. Now, I'm not putting any numbers on it. I'm not claiming to be the only one. There are many who have not yet bent their knee to Baal, but they're not very outspoken. And R.W. Thompson is warning us in the most explicit terms what's going to happen if the spirit of Protestantism ever dies in this country as it has today. He says these are expressive words. When the Pope said that he would eventually, at the proper time, re-enter into the actual possession of Italy, he meant the same thing for the United States of America. R.W. Thompson said these are expressive words, and every Jesuit interprets them to mean that having the direct approval of an infallible Pope, they impose the religious obligation of obedience upon all the members of their society, the Jesuit order, and that it will be offensive to God if they shall cease their struggle for the restoration of the temporal power before it is accomplished. Therefore, they so enlarge the spiritual jurisdiction and authority of the Pope as to make the question of the restoration of his temporal power an international one. Remember, the Roman Catholic Church is a global church. The Roman Catholic Church exists in just nearly every country in the world, so we're talking about an international force. So that he, the Pope, shall have the divine right to require all professing Christians to obey him in all matters relating to that question, no matter under what government or in what part of the world they may live. The refusal of his obedience is held by them to be heresy. Consequently, when the Roman Catholic people of Italy abolished the temporal power of the Pope, remaining in all other respects faithful to the historic and traditional teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, the Jesuits made an organized appeal to all the Roman Catholics throughout the world to unite themselves into a global political religious party in order to restore the temporal power and thereby to teach their Christian brethren in Italy that they have no right to govern themselves by the laws of their own making, and that by irreligiously asserting that right, in imitation of the heretical people of the United States, let me read it again, in imitation of the heretical people of the United States, they have themselves become heretics. So the papacy regards our form of government and the people of this nation to be heretical, and that Italy was simply following our heretical example. So you can only conclude that whatever remedy the Pope seeks for Italy is the same remedy that he's going to seek for the United States of America to correct this heresy. And he's going to use a global force to do it. The Jesuits are going to recruit and excite a global force to do it. He says, in point of fact, the Jesuit appeal is made to populations entirely foreign to the people of Italy, inviting these foreign populations, being Catholics, these foreign populations to subvert the civil institutions the latter have established for themselves by forcibly substituting the Pope as an arbitrary and irresponsible monarch without any constitutional check for a constitutional kings whose powers have been placed under satisfactory restraint. So the Jesuits are going to appeal to Catholics around the world to unseat a legitimately established government of, by, and for the people in order to restore the temporal power. Clearly, we are seeing that the Pope makes good his threat to re-enter at the proper time into their actual possession by using the Jesuits. The Jesuits are the Pope's go-to guys any time the Pope's temporal power is threatened, as it was in Italy at this time. It's the Jesuits' responsibility then to take direct action in Italy and also to incite Roman Catholics in every country around the world to assist into helping overthrow this constitutional government of Italy and to restore the temporal power of the Pope in Italy. The Jesuits. The papacy calls upon the Jesuits. As a matter of fact, the Jesuits operate autonomously. Anytime they see the Pope's temporal power threatened anywhere in the world, they go into immediate action without any calling of the Pope. Now, it's nice to have the calling of the Pope. That keeps the Jesuits out of hot water among those who are strictly loyal to the Pope. But with or without papal authority, they will go into action anytime the Pope's power is threatened. Now, he says the Pope himself, when he realized that he was about to lose his crown, talked about the 200 million of Roman Catholics scattered throughout the world who were to be excited to this conflict with the Italian people. And the Jesuits considered themselves specially assigned to the duty of massing the forces of this great papal army, this global papal army, and directing its movements. So the Jesuits are the generals, the commanders of this global revolutionary force, this global papal force, let me use the correct term. Now it says, in that capacity and with that secret purpose, they have distributed themselves throughout the populous parts of the United States, crowding into our cities and employing their tireless energies in the work of educating a considerable portion of our people, both old and young, in the religious belief that it is their Christian duty to snatch the crown from the head of the constitutionally elected King of Italy, where those of their own religious faith have placed it, and restore it to the Pope, from whose head they have removed it, by employing the same sovereign power which the people of the United States invoked when they laid the foundation of their own institutions. So I've just described for you the mechanism by which the Pope's temporal power will be first gained in this country, by the Jesuits. We'll find out more tomorrow on Inquisition Update.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.